my father didn't fight in the wars. He was a navigator on a spice freighter.
That's what your uncle told you. He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
It may be hard to believe with the era now being explored in almost excruciating detail, but for a long time the Clone Wars were a very mysterious part of Star Wars canon, appearing really only as a throwaway line in A New Hope. Obviously, we now know what the Clone Wars were, but what was the original intention of George Lucas? What were some of the other ideas that the expanded universe put forward? And how did Star Wars Legends authors treat the time period? My name is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to a very brief Star Wars lore video. I think I'm probably going to do these about once a week, just talking about some topic that is worth speaking about, but probably doesn't deserve a whole 10-minute episode. I want to give a special thank you to everyone supporting me on Patreon. It really helps, where views from most Star Wars channels seem to be down this month. If you'd like to support the channel and also read the first half of Chapter 2 of my Star Wars story After Endor, visit patreon.com/EckhartsLadder. So yes, what were the Clone Wars before they were the Clone Wars? As everyone who's spent time in the Star Wars Expanded Universe knows, authors liked to really focus on small details that got screen time in the original films and expand on them. The same was true for the Clone Wars. They'd often be mentioned in passing as some sort of long ago galactic conflict. Interestingly, pretty much everything that the authors included about the Clone Wars ended up being wrong. I asked Pablo Hidalgo about this. Pablo is one of the storytelling leads and creative executives over at Lucasfilm, and he knows more about the Star Wars Expanded Universe than probably anyone else in existence. Specifically, I asked him what, if any, direction was given to Expanded Universe writers who were talking about the Clone Wars before, of course, the prequels came out. He replied, the rule was don't talk about the past, because no one in publishing knew what the Clone Wars were. I'm gonna link down in the comments to the conversation that we had, but he answered a few other interesting questions, talked about Timothy Zahn, the Expanded Universe in general, and I found it to be quite informative and eye-opening. However, notwithstanding the above, authors did often mention the Clone Wars, and they pretty much got everything wrong. And I mean, that's not at all surprising. I doubt George Lucas had even planned out explicitly what the Clone Wars would entail, so there's no way the authors could have known what would happen. The first thing that most writers got wrong was the time period. The Clone Wars ended 19 years before the events of Star Wars. Some assume that the Clone Wars ended after that and that Princess Leia may have actually been involved in some capacity, while most actually assumed that they were ended significantly earlier than that. Pablo also had some comments to say about this note. He said publishing thought, based on what George Lucas had told them, that the Clone Wars were 35 years before A New Hope. It was either a miscommunication, or he changed his mind once he actually started writing the prequels. This time period does make some sense, but it would suggest that the Clone Wars and the Jedi Purge were distinct events, or that Darth Vader somehow fathered Luke Skywalker after he became Darth Vader and no longer Anakin. I think some authors may have thought that the Clone Wars happened, which led to the formation of the Galactic Empire. We know that there was an old republic and that they eventually transitioned into the Empire. I think perhaps the idea might have been that the Empire was benevolent for some time and then initiated the Jedi Purge. There's also the possibility that the Empire transitioned before the Clone Wars, but the specifics aren't really important. The more interesting thing, in my opinion, is that literally every author failed to predict how the Clone Wars would actually happen and the factions that would be involved. Everything I've read has had either the Republic or the Empire fighting against the clones. Obviously, that's not how it turned out. The clones were created as soldiers for the government. They did, of course, turn on the Jedi, but you wouldn't say that they attacked the galaxy at large. Timothy Zahn seems to be the author who most prominently actually tackled the idea of the Clone Wars. He only did so on a very basic level, leaving out pretty much all detail, but he still made a story that was drastically different than what we got. It seems like Timothy Zahn in his Thrawn Trilogy really tried to expand the Star Wars universe, and Lucasfilm kicked back in several different ways. However, they did allow his references to the Clone Wars to remain, and in Timothy Zahn's Thrawn Trilogy, they're basically described as some sort of attack by clones on the rest of the galaxy. He created these clone masters who opposed the rest of the galaxy, basically unleashing destruction through these highly dangerous, almost psychopathic sounding clones. This is described as being a devastating event. Basically, everyone says that they want to avoid another Clone Wars, and when they talk about Thrawn using clones, they say how risky it is just because of the destruction unleashed in the galaxy in the previous years. Mara Jade even rationalizes helping her then mortal enemy, Luke Skywalker, as an attempt to prevent another Clone Wars. This idea of clones fighting the Republic or fighting the central government is really one that I feel most expanded universe authors went with. This could have been an interesting idea, especially if they were clones of Jedi or some other Force-sensitive species, but ultimately we got something vastly different. Interestingly, Zahn's version of the Clone Wars was later somewhat retconned as rogue Kamino cloners uprising against the Empire. You can play these missions actually in Star Wars Battlefront 2. However, this conflict really fails to capture just the sheer scope, size, and destructiveness that the Clone Wars were supposed to entail. Ultimately, Star Wars did handle the Clone Wars in a fairly messy fashion, but it did give us lots of fun content like the Clone Wars TV show. That's all for today's lore video. Love to hear what you guys thought of this new format and which version of the Clone Wars you think would have translated better to not only the big screen, but also the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Let me know up in the poll and down in the comments. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.